The rain had stopped just an hour earlier, leaving the streets of southeast Portland washed clean and glistening under a pale winter sun. Marian Ellsworth walked slowly along the sidewalk, her cane tapping a soft, steady rhythm beside her. She had just come from Darina's funeral, a quiet service for a quiet woman who had lived 2 houses down for nearly 4 decades. At 73, Marian had grown accustomed to saying goodbye, but this one left her heavier than usual. She felt the ache in her knee, the stiffness in her hands. Yet she kept moving with the same determined grace she had carried through every season of her life. Her neighborhood stretched before her like a familiar photograph. Old maples arching overhead, the faint scent of damp pine, and houses that had hardly changed since the late 80s. She had lived here for 38 years, raised her son here, worked late nights grading papers at the kitchen table, hosted birthday parties, mourned losses, celebrated milestones. Every crack in the pavement knew her footsteps. Every window in her home still held a memory she wasn't ready to part with. But Gregory thought otherwise. He had mentioned assisted living 3 times in the last month. Each time, Marian deflected with a gentle smile and an assurance that she was managing perfectly well. And she was. Mostly. Her fall last winter had made him anxious. She knew that. Yet his concern carried an edge these days, an impatience, almost a strategy. She pushed the thought away as she turned onto her street. Her small blue house waited for her at the end of the block, porch light still on though it was only mid-afternoon. She climbed the wooden steps carefully, holding the railing the way her physical therapist had taught her. When she reached the door, she took her keyring from her coat pocket out of pure habit. The brass key had always fit smoothly into the lock over the years, but today, when she pushed it in, it stopped abruptly. She frowned, angled it, tried again. Nothing. She tried her spare key, the one she kept behind the pantry cans for decades, then the old one she'd never bothered throwing away. Each one failed, striking against metal that felt unfamiliar. A quiet chill crept through her chest. Not fear, something colder. She tried the keys again, slower this time, as if patience might coax the lock back into remembering her. But the door remained unmoved, sealed, and silent. Finally, she straightened, gripping the cane as she pulled her phone from her purse. She dialed Gregory. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm, almost relieved. "Mom, I was just about to call you. You're home already." "Yes," she said softly. "Gregory, the locks don't work." A brief pause. Then his tone shifted, not surprised, not apologetic. Simply matter of fact. "Yes, I changed them this morning. Nicole, and I thought it would be safer this way." "Safer," he continued before she could reply. "Mom, we set up a room for you at our place, just for a little while. After that, we'll move you into Willow Creek Senior Living. They have excellent care, and you won't have to worry about anything anymore." Marian pressed her hand against the cool railing, steadying herself as the weight of his words settled into her bones. The betrayal did not explode within her. It folded inward, quiet and controlled, settling behind her ribs like a stone. "I see," she murmured, managing a voice as even as her heartbeat, and though no one else could see it, she stood there with a kind of dignity that refused to break, even as the home she loved was no longer hers to enter. "Mom, I can come pick you up," Gregory offered, his voice settling into the tone he used whenever he wanted compliance, wrapped in the guise of concern. "No, Gregory," Marian said quietly, "that won't be necessary." There was a pause on his end, a soft exhale of irritation she had learned to recognize long before he became a man. "Mom, please, don't make this harder." But Marian had already made her choice. "Goodbye, Gregory." She ended the call before he could shape the next sentence. The silence that followed rested heavy on the porch, broken only by the creak of the old wooden step beneath her cane. She stood there for a long moment, her hand brushing the doorframe as if memory alone might open it. The truth pressed against her with slow, undeniable force. While she was burying a neighbor she had known for nearly 40 years, her son had quietly taken her home away. A wave of exhaustion washed through her, not from age, but from the realization that trust, once cracked, rarely breaks loudly. It splinters quietly, like wood drying after a storm. Her mind slipped backward unbidden. Gregory at 5 years old, standing in the doorway with scraped knees, demanding she read him another bedtime story. Gregory at 14, furious at the world after his father's sudden passing, slamming doors, refusing comfort. Gregory at 23, trembling on graduation day, telling her he couldn't have done it without her. She had weathered every storm with him, anchored them both in this house. Losing her husband had almost broken her, but raising Gregory alone had given her purpose, routine, survival. This home, her home, had been the one unshakable thing. Until today, Marian drew in a breath, letting the cold air steady her spine. She reached for her phone again, this time with clarity, not hope. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed. Dr. Valerie Hanford, a former student turned respected attorney whose Christmas cards still came every year. Valerie answered on the second ring. "Marian, is everything all right?" "No," Marian said simply. "Gregory changed the locks on my house." A beat of stunned silence. Then Valerie's voice sharpened with unmistakable purpose. "That's unlawful. Elder exclusion and wrongful eviction. Where are you?" "On my porch." "Don't stay there. Come to my office. Now, I'll send you the address again." The firmness in her tone was a lifeline Marian hadn't realized she needed. She ordered a rideshare and waited quietly, Kane resting beside her, watching the house that no longer recognized her keys. When the car arrived, she lowered herself into the back seat with careful grace, keeping her grief contained behind a composed facade. Downtown Portland rose around her as the car approached. The glass buildings, the steady hum of traffic, the steel-gray Willamette River threading through the city. She stepped out in front of Valerie's office, gathering herself once more before entering. Valerie met her in the hallway, her expression shifting from worry to controlled anger as Marian explained everything. The funeral, the changed locks, Gregory's plan for assisted living. "This is a clear violation of Oregon law," Valerie said. "He had no right to remove you from your primary residence. None." Marian nodded, absorbing every word with steady calm. "You're staying with me," Valerie continued, "until we sort this out." For the first time that day, Marian felt the faint return of something she thought she had lost. The quiet strength of choosing herself. Valerie led Marian into her office. Warm light, orderly shelves, and a long table cleared as if waiting for exactly this moment. Marian settled into a chair, took a slow breath, and set her worn leather folder on the table. She had kept it organized for decades, updating it every January, a habit born from years of teaching and living alone. Now, for the first time, its careful order felt like armor. "Let's start from the beginning," Valerie said gently. Marian opened the folder. Inside were property deeds dating back 38 years. Refinance documents, city tax receipts, bank statements, insurance renewals, even her late husband's will. Everything was dated, labeled, and chronologically arranged in neat plastic sleeves. Valerie scanned through the paperwork with the speed and focus of a seasoned attorney, flipping pages, marking sections, nodding to herself. When she reached the most recent deed, she tapped it lightly. "This house is yours alone," she said firmly. "Legally, financially, unequivocally. Gregory has no right to change the locks, restrict access, or interfere with your residence in any way." Marian swallowed, hearing the words, spoken aloud, steadied her more than she expected. They moved to the financial section. Valerie paused at an older bank statement. When did Gregory become an authorized user? Years ago, Marion admitted. After my fall. I thought it would make things easier. Valerie's jaw tightened, though her tone remained calm. It may have made things easier for him, not for you. When they finished reviewing the folder, Valerie said, "We need full financial clarity. Let's go to your banks today." Marion nodded, gathering her documents. Determination began replacing the quiet ache in her chest. The first bank branch was only a few blocks away. A clerk recognized Marion from years of visits and greeted her warmly. With Valerie's guidance, Marion requested 5 years of statements, printed and sealed. The clerk printed stack after stack until a thick envelope rested on the counter. Next came the crucial request. "I'd like to remove my son, Gregory Ellsworth, as an authorized user on all accounts," Marion said. The clerk hesitated only a second before following protocol, confirming identity and processing the removal. Marion watched the screen update, her name standing alone once again. At the second bank, the process repeated, statements retrieved, signatures given. Access restored solely to Marion. Any quiet shame she had felt earlier was slowly replaced by something steadier. From there, they drove to a branch offering safe deposit boxes. Marion hadn't opened hers in over a year. When she slid the thin metal drawer out, Valerie leaned forward quietly. Inside were original deeds, birth certificates, and a small pouch holding several USB drives and old micro-recorders. "I kept these just in case," Marion said softly, not out of malice. "But sometimes Gregory and Nicole said things that didn't sit right with me. I never knew if I might need proof someday." Valerie examined one of the recorders briefly, then returned it to the box with careful respect. "You did the right thing preserving these. They may help us more than you realize." They left the bank with the deposit box items secured in a sealed evidence-style folder. Back in the car, Valerie began outlining the strategy. A civil case for unlawful exclusion, financial exploitation prevention, documented evidence, and a demand for immediate restoration of rights and property access. As Marion listened, the fear that had followed her since the funeral began to loosen, strand by strand. For the first time in days, she felt the quiet return of control. Valerie worked late into the evening, typing with the quiet precision of someone who understood exactly how much weight each word could carry. Marion sat beside her in the guest chair, hands folded, watching the letter take shape sentence by sentence. It was not angry. It was not dramatic. It was factual, measured, unmistakably firm. When Valerie printed the final version, she read it aloud so Marion could absorb every line. It demanded immediate restoration of Marion's full access to her home and an end to all interference with her property. It cited Oregon statutes regarding elder exclusion, wrongful eviction, and the misuse of authorized access to financial accounts. It warned of potential civil claims for elder financial exploitation and emotional distress, all supported by the documents and recordings in Marion's possession. The letter also offered Gregory a path to correct his actions before the matter escalated. It was strict, but not cruel, exactly the tone Marion hoped for. Valerie slid the letter into 2 certified mail envelopes. "One to his home," she said, sealing the first. "One to his office. Both require his signature." Marion nodded. Watching the envelopes disappear into the postal drop box outside the building felt strangely ceremonial, like setting down a burden she had carried for years without realizing it. Marion stayed in Valerie's guest room that week. The neighborhood was different from her own, busier, closer to the city center, with bicycles passing by and coffee shops opening before sunrise. Valerie left early for court most mornings, returning with stories of cases Marian found oddly comforting. Life continued around her with a steady rhythm, and for the first time since the funeral, Marian felt the ground beneath her steady again. She filled her days with small routines, reading the newspaper from front to back, folding Valerie's laundry despite Valerie's half-hearted protests, preparing tea in the quiet kitchen, and looking out the window at the rain, tracing slow lines down the glass. She had spent decades teaching young minds to focus, to stay organized, to trust their own reasoning, skills she had somehow forgotten she still possessed. In the stillness of Valerie's home, she found them again. She remembered standing in front of a classroom full of restless students, her calm voice keeping order with nothing more than patience and unwavering structure. She remembered walking Gregory to school, explaining the multiplication tables as he swung his lunchbox beside her. She remembered the confidence of her younger years, the woman who managed a job, a child, a household, and grief without collapsing. She had not lost her strength. She had simply set it down for a while. 3 days after the letters were mailed, Gregory received the certified envelope at his office. His assistant witnessed the moment he opened it. The color drained from his face as he read the first page, then the second, then the third. He took the rest of the day off work without explanation, and though Marian did not see his reaction, she felt the shift in the air, the faint, quiet turning of a tide she had feared would never change. Gregory requested the meeting early that morning. His message was brief, almost clipped. "We need to talk. In person." Marian read it twice before replying with a single location. Maple Fern Cafe, a small place tucked beneath old cedar trees, where she used to take him for hot chocolate after his grade school music recitals. A place that once belonged to gentler years, when she and Valerie arrived. The cafe was quiet, mid-morning lull, soft hum of an espresso machine, windows fogged from the rain outside. Marian chose a corner table facing the door. Her hands were steady as she set her cane against the wall. Valerie sat beside her, a silent anchor. Gregory walked in moments later, shoulders tense beneath his coat. He hesitated when he saw Valerie, but said nothing. Instead, he slid into the seat across from his mother, his eyes avoiding hers. Before he could speak, Marian reached into her bag and placed a small digital recorder on the table. "This conversation will be documented," she said calmly. "It's important we are clear and honest today." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Mom, is that really necessary?" "Yes," she replied. "After everything that has already been done without my knowledge, I think it is." He exhaled sharply, then launched into his explanation, words tumbling over each other as he tried to weave concern into justification. He talked about her fall, her knee, her age, about wanting her to be safe, about being overwhelmed and trying to help. Marian listened without interrupting, her face composed, her eyes steady. When he finished, she folded her hands and spoke in a level voice that carried more force than any raised tone could. "Gregory, safety is not an excuse to take someone's home away. You didn't talk to me. You didn't ask. You made a decision for me because it suited you, not because it protected me." He blinked, startled by her directness. "That's not fair. You've been struggling, Mom. The doctor said I should be careful, not institutionalized, and certainly not locked out of my own house." Valerie slid a folder across the table. "Gregory, we've reviewed the accounts. There have been unauthorized withdrawals over the past 5 years, between $20,000 and $35,000. Gregory froze. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the quiet hiss of steaming milk from behind the counter. I used that money for emergencies," he murmured. "Things were tight. It wasn't supposed to hurt anyone." "Emergencies?" Marian asked softly. "Or covering losses you didn't want to admit?" His face drained of color, and that was when the truth slipped out, unintended, reflexive. "Clients pulled out unexpectedly. I had to replace funds before anyone noticed. I just needed time. He stopped, realizing too late what he had confessed. Valerie's expression hardened, professional and grave. Gregory, misusing client funds is a serious offense. It's not just a financial issue. It's a criminal one. If this continues, or if it's reported, prison becomes a very real outcome. He stared at her, panic flickering across his features. What am I supposed to do? Valerie leaned forward. Here is your path. Sell the boat, the second car, the investments you've been clinging to. Repay what you owe. Restore your mother's full rights to her property. Return her keys. And stop all interference immediately. Marian watched her son's shoulders sag under the weight of consequences he could no longer outrun. After a long silence, he reached into his coat pocket and placed a small metal ring on the table. Her house keys. His hand trembled as he released them. Marian took them back with quiet dignity. And in that exchange, metal sliding across wood, something in Gregory's expression fractured. Not anger, not defiance, accountability, and the smallest flicker of remorse. For the first time, he seemed to understand the depth of what he had done. Marian returned to her house on a gray, wind-brushed afternoon, the kind Portland often offered in early spring. Valerie had already arranged for a locksmith to meet her earlier that morning. And now a new deadbolt gleamed on the front door. Clean, solid, undeniably hers. Marian fit her new key into the lock, feeling the smooth turn of metal that responded only to her hand. When she pushed the door open, a faint draft rustled through the quiet interior. The house greeted her with familiarity, but something inside the silence felt slightly off, like a room exhaling after holding its breath too long. She paused just beyond the threshold, letting her eyes adjust. It did not take long to notice the changes. A drawer in the hallway console was open an inch wider than she ever left it. One of her cookbooks sat crooked on the dining hutch, its spine leaning too far forward. A small rug in the living room lay shifted, no longer aligned with the coffee table. They were not signs of violence. They were signs of intrusion, hands that did not belong to her moving through the spaces she had curated over decades. And though the realization carried a cold sting, Marian did not crumble. Instead, she set her cane carefully aside and began closing drawers, straightening books, smoothing rugs, and restoring the gentle order she had always kept. Each motion was deliberate, unhurried. She dusted the mantel, wiped the kitchen counters, folded a blanket that had been draped clumsily over her armchair. It felt less like cleaning and more like reclaiming one quiet corner at a time. By evening, the house looked like itself again. Marian brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat at her kitchen table, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of passing cars. The silence felt heavier than she remembered, but it was hers, entirely hers. The week that followed passed without a single call from Gregory or Nicole. Their absence settled over the house like a cool, thin layer of frost, noticeable but not unmanageable. Marian expected, perhaps even hoped, for a moment of reconciliation or apology. But the phone remained still, and she learned to take its quiet as both a wound and a reprieve. She filled her days with small tasks, trimming the lavender outside her bedroom window, reorganizing the pantry shelves, rereading a worn anthology of classic poetry. She rediscovered the slow pleasure of mornings without interruptions, afternoons marked by the steady rhythm of her own choosing, and evenings framed by the soft glow of lamplight rather than conflict. Loneliness came in waves, unexpected, sharp at times, but it no longer consumed her. Beneath it grew a deeper, steadier sensation, peace. The peace of being in command of her own life, of her own space, of her own choices. In the quiet of those 7 days, Marian realized something she hadn't felt in years. She was free, maybe not entirely healed, maybe not untouched by the betrayal, but free in a way that tasted like the first breath after a long-held silence. Marian was in the backyard, tending to her lavender, when she heard cautious footsteps on the gravel path. She turned, expecting perhaps a delivery driver or a neighbor passing through the gate. Instead, she saw Evan standing a few feet away, awkwardly holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, daisies, lupins, and a sprig of something he probably couldn't name. His eyes were unsure but hopeful. "Hi, Grandma," he said quietly. Marian straightened slowly, brushing soil from her hands. "Hello, sweetheart." Her voice softened in a way she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. Evan stepped closer, offering her the bouquet. "These are, well, I picked them on the way over. I didn't know what you liked." Marian took them gently. "They're lovely. Thank you." For a moment, they simply stood together in the cool afternoon air. Evan looked older than she remembered, shoulders tense, gaze unsettled. She recognized the expression. It was the look of someone carrying more than he knew how to explain. "Can we sit?" he asked. They settled on the porch steps, the flowers resting beside them. Evan rubbed his palms against his jeans before finally speaking. "Everything at home is messed up," he said. "Mom and Dad are fighting all the time. Sophie stays out as late as she can. And he paused, swallowing hard. "I hate being there." Marian's heart tightened. She had known things were strained, but hearing it through her grandson's trembling honesty made it real in a different way. "I'm sorry, Evan," she said. "That must be very hard." He nodded, staring at the ground. "It used to feel different, you know? When we'd come here every Sunday, Dad would help you carry dishes to the table. Mom would pretend she didn't like your mashed potatoes but always took seconds. Sophie and I fought over who got the last roll. It felt, I don't know, like a real family." Marian listened, her chest aching with a mixture of sorrow and clarity. Gregory's choices had wounded her deeply, but the fractures inside his own household went far beyond a single decision. Pain had filtered down through years, threading itself into the lives of her grandchildren. Evan drew a shaky breath. "I miss that. I miss all of us being together. And I miss you." A long silence followed, gentle rather than heavy. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of cut grass and the faint sweetness of the wildflowers. Marian laid a hand over his. "I miss you too," she said. "And the truth is, I miss those Sundays as well." He looked up, hope flickering across his face. "Do you think we could start them again? Just us? You don't have to cook anything fancy. I just want us to be together." Marian considered the idea, not with hesitation, but with reverence. Sunday dinners had once been the heart of their family, something she thought had been lost forever. "Yes," she said at last. "Let's bring them back." Evan exhaled with visible relief, shoulders relaxing as if he had set down a weight. "Thank you, Grandma. Really." As he stood to leave, he squeezed her hand, and Marian felt something shift softly within her, a quiet, steady bridge forming between past wounds and the fragile possibility of repair. Marian woke before the sun on Sunday, her house still wrapped in quiet shadows. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment, hands resting on the counter, letting herself feel the weight and warmth of what she was about to do. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a gesture, a step toward something resembling family. She began cooking the way she always had, deliberately, lovingly, with small rituals woven through every movement. Potatoes peeled and seasoned, a roast slow cooking until the aroma filled the entire house. Fresh herbs from her garden sprinkled into a bowl of bright, colorful salad. It wasn't a feast meant to impress. It was a memory revived, the kind of meal that had once brought her family together without effort. By early afternoon, the dining table was set with the old ceramic dishes Gregory had painted in kindergarten. Marian hesitated before placing them out, but the nostalgia felt fitting, almost necessary. Evan arrived first, carrying a sack of apples he'd said they might use for dessert next week. He beamed when he saw the spread. "Grandma, it smells exactly like it used to." Marion touched his arm. That was the idea. Sophie showed up next, a little breathless, holding a bakery box with pastries dusted in powdered sugar. "I didn't have time to bake," she admitted, "but I wanted to bring something." "You being here is enough," Marion said, and meant it. Still, even with the warmth of her grandchildren filling the house, Marion felt her heart tighten every time she glanced at the clock. She hadn't expected Gregory and Nicole to come. She had extended the invitation out of respect, not hope. At 4:12 p.m., the doorbell rang. The room stilled. Evan exchanged a glance with Sophie before heading to answer it. A murmur of voices followed, uncertain hellos, and then Gregory stepped inside, Nicole close behind him. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of the confidence that had once been their default expression. "Mom," Gregory said softly, "thank you for inviting us." Marion nodded, her posture composed but not cold. "You're welcome. Dinner is ready." They all sat, careful at first, the tension visible but not impenetrable. Forks scraped softly against plates. Chairs shifted. Small talk emerged in cautious, uneven waves, weather work, a recent movie Sophie insisted they all needed to see. Nicole complimented the roast. Marion accepted the words without bitterness. Slowly, tiny familiarities resurfaced. Gregory closed his eyes briefly as he tasted the mashed potatoes, the way he had done since childhood. Sophie laughed at one of Evan's dry jokes. The rhythm of family, a rhythm Marion once believed irretrievable, began to pulse faintly around the table. After dessert, when everyone drifted into the living room, Marion asked Gregory to stay back for a moment. He stiffened but nodded. She handed him a neatly folded paper. "There's a financial literacy center near the university," she said. "They're looking for part-time instructors. You always had a talent for explaining things clearly. It might be a way to rebuild quietly." Gregory stared at the paper, speechless. His throat moved, but no sound came. When he finally spoke, his voice was unsteady. "Mom, I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," Marion replied gently, "but you need it, and your children need to see you try." He swallowed hard, emotion tightening his features. "Thank you." Marion gave a small nod, offering neither permission nor absolution, only possibility. When they said their goodbyes at the door, the air felt different. Still fragile, still uncertain, but undeniably warmer. That evening, as Marion washed the last plate, she knew something had shifted. Not a miracle, not a clean slate, a beginning, just enough to believe in again. The months that followed unfolded with a kind of quiet steadiness, as if life itself had decided to stop rushing long enough for everyone to breathe again. Gregory took the first steps, uneven, painful, but deliberate. He sold the fishing boat he'd clung to for years, let go of the second car, and liquidated the risky investments that had dragged him into debt. Piece by piece, he repaid what he owed, not just to Marion, but to the clients he had nearly failed. He and Nicole parted ways in a calm, almost somber conversation. No accusations, no theatrics, just two people acknowledging the end of something they no longer had the energy to salvage. Then, surprisingly quickly, he accepted the part-time instructor position at the Financial Literacy Center. Teaching came naturally to him. He had inherited that from Marion, whether he realized it or not. The work grounded him, softened him, changed him. He sent her updates without defensiveness, occasionally even asking for advice. And Marion responded not with judgment, but with steady honesty, her boundaries firm, her affection quiet but genuine. Evan blossomed in the new atmosphere. The tension at home had always pulled him tight, but now he began to relax, to grow into himself. He spent weekends hiking with friends, took on a steady job at a local bookstore, and spoke openly for the first time about wanting to study environmental design. His conversations with Marian became deeper too, no longer a grandson seeking refuge, but a young man sharing his world. Sophie surprised everyone by shifting her college plans. After weeks of shadowing Valerie, sitting in on lunchtime court hearings, and listening to legal podcasts she quoted with an enthusiasm that made Marian laugh, she declared her new goal, pre-law. Valerie welcomed her curiosity, offering guidance with patience and pride. Marian watched their bond grow with a warmth she hadn't expected. Two strong women connected not by blood, but by admiration. Through all of this, Marian and Gregory rebuilt themselves in small, intentional steps. They stopped pretending things were fine. Instead, they talked about the years he resented her independence, about the guilt he carried after her fall, about the pressure he'd felt to be the perfect son in ways she never asked of him. Marian admitted her own mistakes too. How she often assumed silence was kindness. How she forgave too quietly. How she hid her pain, hoping not to burden anyone. Their healing wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Amid this slow transformation, Marian did something she had dreamed of quietly for years. She packed a single suitcase and boarded a plane, first to London, where she walked along the Thames under a gray sky that reminded her of Portland but carried a different kind of possibility. Then Paris, where she lingered in small cafes and visited museums with no schedule at all. Rome welcomed her with warm evenings and the scent of basil drifting from open windows. In Athens, she stood before the Parthenon, leaning slightly on her cane, feeling history rise around her like a second heartbeat. Each place unraveled her a little, softened her a little, freed her a little. Every Sunday, no matter the time zone, she called home, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. And those calls were filled not with tension, but with updates, small jokes, family stories, and quiet gratitude. Somewhere between the cobblestone streets and the early morning flights, Marian realized she had rediscovered something she'd forgotten to look for. Herself. Beyond motherhood, beyond aging, beyond the years of sacrifice, a woman still capable of beginning again. When Marian stepped off the plane at PDX, her suitcase rolling behind her with a soft hum, she felt lighter, not physically, but in a way she had trouble naming. Months of travel had peeled away layers she didn't know she was carrying. Europe lived inside her now in small impressions. The glow of street lamps on the Seine, the echo of footsteps in Roman alleys, the afternoon sunlight that drenched the Acropolis in molten gold. She returned home both changed and deeply herself. Evan and Sophie met her at arrivals, waving enthusiastically over the crowd. Evan grabbed her suitcase. Sophie wrapped her in a tight hug, and the three of them walked toward the parking garage with an ease that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "Dad's cooking dinner tonight," Evan announced proudly. Marian raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "He practiced," Sophie said with a laugh. "We supervised." When they pulled up to her house, Marian noticed something different before she even stepped inside. The porch railing had been sanded and repainted a soft sage green. The front garden was newly trimmed, the lavender replanted with fresh mulch. Someone, likely Evan, had hung a small wooden wind chime from the eave. But inside was where the true surprise waited. Her living room, though unchanged in layout, felt renewed. Evan had refinished her coffee table, polishing away decades of scratches, but leaving the natural grain intact. Sophie had reupholstered the two armchairs in a fabric Marian had admired months ago but never bought for herself. And on the mantel sat a framed photograph. The whole family at the first Sunday dinner they had shared again. Awkward smiles, hesitant closeness, but undeniably together. Gregory stepped forward from the kitchen doorway, holding a small velvet box. "Welcome home, Mom." His voice was steadier than she remembered, touched with humility rather than pride. He offered her the box with both hands, almost reverently. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a tiny door. Not ornate, not flashy, simple, purposeful. Engraved on the back were 4 words: "You opened your own way." Marian brushed her thumb across the engraving, feeling a swell of emotion rise behind her sternum. The gift was not an apology. It was recognition of her resilience, her choices, her steady reclaiming of a life nearly taken from her. "Thank you," she said softly. And with those 2 words, something whole settled between them. Sunday dinners continued. Not out of habit, but out of genuine desire. Gregory came early to help. Sophie tried new recipes she found online. Evan set the table with mismatched napkins and a sense of pride. The meals were imperfect but warm, filled with small stories, gentle teasing, and slow trust rebuilding itself one weekend at a time. Marian watched them with a quiet satisfaction, grateful not for perfection, but for progress, honest, earned progress. The kind that does not erase past wounds, but grows around them with new strength. One crisp morning, while watering her lavender, she opened her laptop and searched flights to Japan. Kyoto in spring, Tokyo in autumn, hot springs in winter. The possibility filled her with a thrill she hadn't felt since her 20s. She smiled to herself. At 73, she was no longer waiting for life to happen around her. She was choosing it deliberately, unapologetically. And as she stood in the doorway of her home, pendant resting warmly against her chest, Marian understood something she wished she had known years earlier. Aging is not a closing. It is a returning to one's truest self, quietly, powerfully. And with that, her story continued, unrushed, unafraid, and profoundly her own.